For your next project, you're going to explore the idea of artist themes. So, thinking about how you can create this into a series of artwork. So, you are going to pick a theme to explore in your next series of work. You're going to research the definition of that theme, looking it up in a dictionary, exploring genres that might have artwork that are similar to your theme. You should find examples of artwork that are made within that theme. And I want you to think about how you could bring a new or interesting perspective to the exploration of that theme. So, what are you going to bring that's from your own background and from your own interests? Can you imagine being able to make a larger series of artwork exploring this concept? So, just not one work of art, but could you think about having multiple works of art exploring this one theme? Think about what speaks to you specifically about this theme. Is there something personal that interests you? Is it something in your background, something else you've seen that sparked this idea? Um, and remember, we're going to go through a whole bunch of different themes in this PowerPoint, but your theme does not have to be one of these themes that I've mentioned. It's just a starting point, and this is meant to get you thinking. So, the first theme that we're going to look at is irony. Now, irony is one of those themes that you can think of as kind of humorous, right? The idea that you're juxtaposing two things that normally wouldn't be put together into one theme. This is a piece by Kahane Wiley, and as you can see, there's sort of a modern day person dressed in contemporary attire, juxtaposed in what seems to be a classical artwork. If anybody has seen this piece before, it's the piece of Napoleon Bonaparte riding his stallion to victory. To place a contemporary figure on that is meant to juxtapose those two kind of worlds. And we've talked about Kahane Wiley in the past. He's very interested in this idea of how do you or how is power represented through history and through these monumental artworks, right? And if we think back to when Napoleon Bonaparte was around, who would have had their painting, their portrait painted? Only the very wealthy, only the aristocracy. It was shown as sort of a symbol of wealth. In Kahane Wiley, oftentimes he just picks random people off the street that are walking by his studio in Harlem and chooses them to be a part of these monumental images. So he's really talking about power in society and who we create these monumental images of. Love is another common painting theme or theme in painting and drawing. This is a well-known piece. This is sort of the stereotypical idea that we have about love. Love being butterflies in your stomach, beauty, perfect light hitting a beautiful maiden floating through the air. Now, there's also sort of a little funny part about this painting, right? You see the couple, the man almost posing a little too perfectly there in the bushes. But then you see on the other side, there's another man that's helping to sort of choreograph this whole thing. See how he's pulling the strings and trying to make the moment perfect, right? Um, it's almost like when somebody takes a picture of somebody taking an Instagram picture, right? You see how kind of funny and unrealistic it looks. That's what that man in the background is showing. Like, this is not reality, right? This isn't real love. This is sort of the flimsy, fluffy, fake version of love, right? So if you want to think about the theme of love, what do you want to say about it? Is it real? Are you thinking about, is there a facade? How do you show images of real love? That's something you could think about in your pieces. So another common theme seen in artwork is the idea of beauty. Now, beauty is also one of those things that could have many definitions, right? Everyone's seen this painting before, right? The Mona Lisa. Now, the Mona Lisa is seen sort of as this icon of beauty, right? It's one of the most famous paintings in the world. But when you look at the Mona Lisa, would this be considered a modern day standard of beauty, what we see in magazines, those kinds of things, right? Um, but in some ways, that idea that we still have this strange, sort of manipulated idea of the perfection of beauty is still there. Like, what idealized beauty looks like over the ages shifts and changes. And that's something that you could talk about in your work. What defines the definition of beauty, and who decides what that definition will be? Isolation. This is an interesting topic that you could talk about right now. We think about COVID and how that has really isolated all of us. Creating a piece that deals with that kind of isolation could be very interesting. This is also a very well known piece by Edward Hopper. If you've seen his work before, he commonly deals with this idea of isolation. And in the 50s, he believed that technology would isolate us. So it's almost a little bit ironic to think about us now in 2020, how technology connects us, but also isolates us at the same time. You could think about creating a work of art based around that idea. And Hopper, you can see here, there's a lot of people together in this cafe, but they're distant, right? They're not really engaging with each other. And there's this empty space you see surrounding those figures. So he's helped to help create this feeling of emptiness. And he does that throughout his pieces, right? His composition, how he sets up the color. He's really thinking about that idea of loneliness and how you portray that in a composition. On the opposite side of that, community could be another theme that you might explore. In this piece, you can see, what does this artist think about the idea of community? This is a work by Bellows. If you look closely, you almost don't see any individual faces. There's a little bit of insinuation of a mouth or an eye, but we don't see enough that we might be able to pick that person out from a crowd. All the figures almost become just this mass of bodies, right? And he's trying to show how New York during this time period was just overflowing with people. There's so many people that they almost become unpersonalized, right? You're just bumping and grinding into people and you don't even see them as individuals anymore, which is kind of the opposite of that idea of isolation, right? It's being isolated, surrounded by a sea of people. Solitude is another theme you could explore. This is a work by Thomas Cole, one of the Hudson River School artists. And he was really interested in the idea of sort of the wilderness and the sort of the calm and yet exciting nature that wilderness can bring. And this piece is meant to juxtapose those two worlds, wilderness and sort of tamed society. You can see all of the fields that have been plowed and sort of neatly and evenly laid out on the right. And on the left is the west, the wild wilderness. And you can see the artist there sort of set up down there with his little easel at the bottom. So you can see which side Thomas Cole enjoyed being on. He enjoyed being on the in the wild, sort of finding his peace and excitement. Hope is another uh, theme that you might explore. Um, since we're sort of in the political season right now, um, the idea that art can have a political theme or ideology to it is also something that you could think about, right? Um, Shepard Fairey did this original Obama poster back in 2008, and he is not afraid to shy away from political themes within his work. He often thinks about, he's really interested in the idea of the politics and the government and sort of the propaganda that has been put out, that's meant to sort of design to control the populace. He also is well known for those little obey stickers that you see stuck around places. A lot of his work is interested in exploring themes from the book 1984, the idea that allowing the government and companies to have too much control and influence over our daily lives can have negative consequences. You'll see those kinds of themes explored in his work. Fruitful is another theme that you might explore. This is a work by Hieronymus Bosch, in The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's actually the center panel in what is a triptych of work. That he shows heaven, the earth, everybody sinning in it, and hell. And if you look really closely, there are some crazy details in there in both the Garden of Earthly Delights and Earth, and where people are sinning, and what sort of happens to the people in hell afterwards. And you can kind of think of it, like every little bit of this painting has extreme detail in it. It's almost like the Where's Waldo of trying to figure out what's going on. And that level of detail has like a sort of intensity to it, which is based around that idea of fruitfulness. On the other side of that is barren. This is a work by Rothko, done very shortly before his death. He knew that he was dying and sort of contemplating the meaning of that. And so they're very dark, bleak paintings. There is a chapel in Houston that he created these works for. And they're meant to be sort of empty, but that emptiness is meant to allow for meditation. So he was sort of thinking about how meditation helps to bring you, clear your mind, ease the soul, those kinds of things. And you can see that idea reflected in those works of art. Melancholy is another theme you might think about. This is Picasso's Blue series, where he really sort of delved into color and expressionism and how the color of blue could express this feeling and emotion in his pieces. And, he, for a number of years, decided to only paint in blue after a friend of his committed suicide. He was sort of dealing with those emotions and how to process them. So you can see that theme repeated in his work over and over again. Outcast is another theme commonly explored by artists. This is the piece A Raft of the Medusa. Um, this is a group of sailors shortly after a shipwreck. Um, the artist is clearly trying to show the desperation that these uh, people feel, that they're trying to be rescued. Um, and you can think, this theme, this idea that sort of struggle that they're feeling, is something that you commonly see in these sort of epic paintings from this time. That we don't necessarily have to see the ship in the distance, but we know there's some sort of um, epic battle of life and death happening within this piece. Technology is another common theme that artists explore. This is a drawing by Diana Cooper. It's mixed media in Sharpie and foam core. And Diana Cooper is really interested in exploring how, you know, technology in these very detailed systems, but she does them in kind of like a craft-based way where everything's done in Sharpie. She doesn't use a lot of rulers and straight edges, so things are a little bit wonky. Um, it's almost bringing that human element to technology and how it's made and kind of exploring those connections. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, right? We have something that's very handmade looking up against something that looks sort of very um, difficult to grasp, right? When we think about these mathematical systems, they usually seem very separate from the human touch. Terror is another common theme explored by artists. This is work by Francisco Goya, um, and it is Saturn devouring his children. And Goya was interested in this idea of how governments could turn on their own people. Um, he was involved in the Spanish Revolution. He was even, for being vocal in his artwork, actually speaking against a lot of members of government. He was um, uh, politically targeted at different points in his life. And you could see how he felt, uh, that the government was actually trying to step in and destroy his own people. And this is, he explored that idea in this work. He also explored it on the 5th of May, another famous work of his, where, you can sort of see the destruction and aftermath that happens when governments turn on their own people. Angst is another common theme explored in works of art. That idea of sort of teenage rebellion, right? This is a work by Nye. You can kind of see that in where, we have often animated children or teenagers doing things that they shouldn't quite be doing, right? Or doing things that are more adult-like. Murakami also explores that theme a lot in his work. You'll see a lot of Japanese artists exploring this idea of sort of using adolescence or childhood to explore very adult themes. This is often referred to as little boy syndrome, the idea that when the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, that they were suspended in a perpetual adolescence where the United States was always watching over them. It's one of the reasons, something that people talk a lot about, how anime culture really started and evolved in Japan. And a lot of artists now are interested in exploring those same ideas. Imagination is another common theme in artwork. This is a piece by Fred Tomaselli. He often uses mixed media to explore his own issues with addiction and mental illness, and you can often see a lot of the things that are sort of spiraling in his head collaged or hidden within his pieces. Um, he oftentimes, you'll see smaller images collaged into larger images. He even uses, oftentimes, the little tiny dots are actual pills or even marijuana leaves that have been collaged into his drawings. Repetition is another common theme. Um, the idea that you can use pattern and design to really think about the formal elements is maybe something you could explore within your work. We talked about before, political artwork is very common themes. We looked at the work, more contemporary work of Obama and sort of or the hope poster of Obama and those political posters. But political artwork has been around as long as artwork has been around, practically. You've probably seen this work before. It's Lady Liberty leading the people. It's sort of an interesting piece in itself, in that we see the central figure. For some reason, her dress is ripped away. She's holding the flag forward. The dress being ripped away is not an accident. It's meant to reference Greek and Greek sculpture. She's meant to sort of look like Aphrodite or a Greek goddess, because Greece was the first democracy and that France was fighting its own revolution for a democratic state. It was meant to sort of envelop some of those classical ideas. So, like we said, there's a lot of different ideas that you can explore within your work. This is just a way to start brainstorming about some of those common themes. You can come up with your own theme outside of some of these mentioned. You can use one of these themes if you want. We're going to start this week brainstorming what those possible ideas could be for your final project.